So, Godzilla King of the Monsters is right around the corner, and I think it's safe to say that Godzilla fans are excited. Now, personally speaking, this is one of the most highly anticipated movies of my life, which I know sounds like hyperbole, especially to someone who doesn't have the emotional connection to Godzilla in the same way I and so many others do. So I figured to celebrate the film's impending release, I'd sit down and set the record straight as to why Godzilla King of the Monsters is such a milestone entry in one of the longest running franchises in cinema history, what it symbolizes within the broader context, and why it matters so much to me. So strap in, folks, this is going to get a bit personal, but I think it's important to explain my experiences as a Godzilla fan a bit in order to better understand where I'm coming from. So without further ado, let me explain the importance of Godzilla King of the Monsters. Like many kids, I was drawn to Godzilla through my childhood fascination with dinosaurs. I was the kid who could pronounce the complicated names, watch children's educational programs, and wore out my VHS copy of Jurassic Park. It was an obsession, and film was the main art form that fueled that obsession. Knowing this, my family satiated my hunger as often as they could, leading to the one fateful day where my grandparents took me to the video store to rent a movie. It was there that I came across a little movie called Godzilla 1985. I was only 4 or 5, but all I needed to see was a giant dinosaur on the cover to know I wanted to watch it. I was captivated. When you're a kid, you don't see models or wires or a man in a suit. All I saw was Godzilla, and he looked as real as anything I'd ever seen before. I didn't root for the humans. I was on Godzilla's side, and so I was understandably sad when he took that fateful plunge into Mount Mihara at the end, piercing my ears with that horrifying scream. It was an image I never forgot. Godzilla stayed in that volcano for a few more years while my obsession with dinosaurs remained. It wasn't until I was around 8 or so that he would re-emerge, once again at the video store. I was walking through the science fiction section, and there to my left was a small collection of Godzilla movies. I still remember the titles: Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, Return of Mechagodzilla, and Godzilla King of the Monsters. Looking back, I'm surprised I wasn't turned off by these movies. They were slow, plodding, and undeniably cheesy. I remember watching Terror of Mechagodzilla with a friend, and us being somewhat bored waiting for something exciting to happen. But despite this, I was drawn to the character. I was never into superheroes like Batman or Superman or Spider-Man. I was more drawn towards monsters and creatures and dinosaurs. But Godzilla met me halfway. He was the ultimate superhero, a superpowered gigantic dinosaur that fights for his home no matter how powerful the opponent. Even from the small pool of films I experienced, I got the sense that there was a whole mythology around Godzilla waiting to be discovered. I wanted to know more, and somehow I knew more was out there. I just needed to find it. And eventually I did. One day, as I was perusing through a bookstore at the mall, I came across what would become an indispensable tool to aid me in my burgeoning Godzilla fandom: the official Godzilla Compendium. Inside, I found every question I ever had answered, a full list, synopsis, and behind-the-scenes facts of all, at the time, 22 movies, mini essays extrapolating on some of the science and themes of the series, and most beloved of all, a comprehensive profile of every monster, breaking down their powers and origins. It became my Bible, and was exactly what I needed to start my quest, to get my hands on every Godzilla movie ever made. Some of them were easy to find: King Kong vs. Godzilla, Godzilla vs. Megalon, and the previously watched Godzilla 1985 were easy to come by. Others, however, were not, and it became a sort of treasure hunt being on the lookout for them when I was dragged around shopping with my mother. I even gave her a list, so that when she was out by herself, she always knew what to look for. I still remember when she came home one day with Son of Godzilla. It was an unexpected surprise, and we watched it as a family. It was around this time that the now much maligned TriStar American Godzilla was on the verge of release, and suddenly I was seeing hype for it everywhere I looked, and I was loving it. Many G-fans can tell you that, at least back then, it can be a solitary passion. Other kids just didn't see what I saw, and as much as I tried to share it with them, they couldn't understand its appeal. Say what you will about the actual film, but seeing the culture around me getting as pumped for Godzilla as I was felt great. Even still, it was always an uphill battle. I did what I could, showing schoolmates my Godzilla Compendium, lending friends movies, watching carefully selected movies with friends when they came over. All of this was an attempt to share my passion with those around me, and it never took. No matter what I tried, it still seemed like they never saw what I saw. Even worse, the American film influenced many misconceptions about the character I often had to correct. I even remember having a debate with a classmate that argued that the American Godzilla was more powerful than the Japanese version. Needless to say, that got me riled up. Eventually, I managed to collect VHS copies of every one of the 22 original G-flicks, with the exception of two, Godzilla Raids Again and Godzilla vs. Hedorah, both of which I wouldn't see until many years later. A few years after the TriStar film's release, the Millennium series began, and I finally got to see my first real Godzilla movie in theaters. Godzilla 2000 was released in the States, and I made sure to see it, bringing along my dad, my uncle, and a cousin. It still remains the only Japanese film I've seen in theaters, and shortly after that, both Godzilla X Megaguirus and GMK played back-to-back on the Sci-Fi channel, which of course I made sure to record. However, around this time, I felt my enthusiasm for Godzilla beginning to fade. As I got older and grew into my teens, the isolation I felt with regards to this particular passion of mine grew with it. It was nothing super dramatic, but I started to feel a little ashamed about my love of Godzilla, and would hide the fact from my peers because I didn't want them to think I was weird. Looking back, this was a mistake, but as a teenager, all I wanted to do was blend in. I started to fall out of interest with Godzilla. Not completely, but enough to cancel my subscription to G-Fan magazine, and enough that I didn't bother going out of my way to watch the last few entries of the Millennium series. Like so many other things, Godzilla became another cherished relic of my childhood that I was convinced I needed to move on from. And I did for many years, until one day I came across the official, unofficial proof of concept teaser for the upcoming Warner Brothers produced American Godzilla film set to be released in 2014. I was already aware about the film before and was interested, how could I not be? But something about this trailer stirred the latent fan within me, and suddenly I couldn't wait for its release. Seeing American culture getting excited for a Godzilla film again was thrilling, and while not as over the top as the '98 film, witnessing Godzilla, the real Godzilla, finally being accepted and treated with respect both critically and financially was even more so. Godzilla was back, as was my passion, and this time I wasn't hiding or retreating. Godzilla had finally gone mainstream. Of course, little did I realize at the time how wrong I was. Sure, Godzilla himself was more popular than ever, but everything else, the world and the mythology, the supporting monsters, they all remained in the back, where only the fans could see. It hadn't reached Marvel or DC levels, not even close, which is why when a sequel was immediately greenlit and it was announced that Mothra, Rodan, and King Ghidorah would be involved, I was blown away. For years, I and many G-fans have imagined what it would be like to see these characters, these titans of the genre, being given a big-budget Hollywood treatment. It's not that I don't love and appreciate the small-scale craft and the inherent cheesiness of the Japanese films, and if you forced me to choose, I'd always choose that. But there's no denying the power that the Hollywood machine has within the medium of film, and to have some of that power being thrown into this franchise and these characters is a dream come true. When Godzilla King of the Monsters comes out, it will be many people's very first introduction to these classic kaiju. Their personalities, their powers, their roles within the mythology, all of it will be filtered through an American lens for the very first time, and thousands of new fans will be created. If you'd have told my younger self that an American Godzilla film featuring his most iconic enemies, given a proper budget, and featuring a huge cast of big-name actors would come out in my lifetime, I wouldn't have believed it. But it makes sense it's happening now. Geek culture has taken over the industry, and unlike in the 90s, studios know they have to get it right. And by golly does it look like this movie is getting it right. Director Michael Dougherty is clearly a fan of monsters and genre films, and the more I listen to him speak and see the ideas he's bringing to the table, the more confident I am in the film delivering the goods. So for as much nostalgia as I have for the '98 film and all the hype it brought about at the time, this is the film I'd wished we'd have gotten back then. 10-year-old me wouldn't have been able to contain himself, but the '98 film was needed. It was a painful but productive and necessary step for this film to get made, the lesson Hollywood needed to learn before success was possible. All this hype and praise probably sounds ridiculous. We don't even know if the movie will be good. But regardless, Godzilla King of the Monsters is undeniably a significant milestone for this franchise, and its success or failure will be a measurement of how much mainstream appeal Godzilla has accumulated over the years. It needs to do well, and it makes me nervous considering how much competition there is around it. But I can't think about that. If nothing else, I'm just happy this movie exists, and plan on enjoying its existence all the way through, regardless of what happens. It's a great time to be a Godzilla fan, perhaps more so than any other. Between the legendary MonsterVerse and the experimental stuff coming out of Japan, there is so much content to consume, and through the internet and channels like this, we all can come together and enjoy and discuss it with each other in ways past generations never could. There is so much more information out there than there was when I was a kid, and access to the films in their original uncut state is so much easier to come by than it used to be. The curtain has finally been lifted over Godzilla. And while part of me does lament the loss of some of the mystery inherent to it that originally made it fun to discover, this is unequivocally a good thing, as it eliminates the barrier of entry that for so long made it hard for newcomers to jump in. Godzilla King of the Monsters is almost here, and on its shoulders carries over 60 years worth of history that American audiences will be experiencing for the first time. This is why fans such as myself are foaming at the mouth in anticipation. It is a symbol, a sign that Godzilla is not only still with us, but is ready to step up to the mainstream, face off against the big boys, and show the unfamiliar what they've been missing. It may not have the cultural significance of, say, Shin Godzilla, but within the context of the larger franchise, it just might be one of the most important entries in the series. I hope it does well, but more than anything, I hope it's a good movie that makes me feel what I felt watching those old movies when I was a kid. When I didn't see the wires, or the models, or the man in a suit, I simply saw Godzilla, my hero, the king of the monsters. So that's it, guys and gals. If you're still here, I want to thank you so much for watching and listening to my ramblings. This was a different kind of video than I usually make, but now seemed the perfect time. I do plan on doing a full, in-depth, spoiler-filled review of King of the Monsters when it comes out, but don't expect it to be out as soon as the movie is, because I'll need to see it multiple times and truly process it before I can confidently articulate my feelings. And I hope you'll join me in voicing your feelings about the film as well, so feel free to follow the Up From The Depths Twitter account. I want to hear everything you guys have to say, and that is the easiest and fastest way to stay in contact with me. I can't wait to discuss this film with you guys. Thanks again for watching, and as always, long live the king.